The first time Clara Sutton saw him, he was bleeding into the dirt, barely breathing. He lay sprawled behind a barn on her family's land, half covered in dry leaves and dust, his chest rising only in shallow gasps. The distant thunder of horses had drawn her outside. The posse had galloped past not 2 minutes earlier, chasing someone, and apparently they'd missed him. Clara should have turned away. She should have gone back inside, locked the door, and waited for the sun to rise like every other frightened settler did when blood stained the plains. But instead, she knelt beside him. His skin was copper-toned, slick with sweat and blood, and his long black hair clung to his face. An arrow had pierced his shoulder, and there was a gash along his side. Even in agony, his features held pride. High cheekbones, sharp jaw, stubborn mouth. He was Comanche, the enemy, or so she'd been raised to believe. But Clara didn't see an enemy. She saw a man left die alone, without another thought. She dragged him into the barn, out of sight from anyone who might return. The act would brand her a traitor if anyone found out. She knew that, but her conscience had always been louder than fear. For hours that night, she worked to stop the bleeding. She cut the arrow free with a hot blade and sewed the gash in his ribs. He never cried out, not once, even unconscious. His silence was warrior-like. She stayed beside him through the night, dozing upright in the hay as coyotes howled in the distance. Her lantern burned low. At dawn, he opened his eyes. Deep, dark brown eyes locked onto hers. He didn't flinch, didn't speak, just watched her, like he didn't know whether to trust her or kill her. Clara sat back, holding up her hands. "You're safe," she whispered. "I stitched you up, gave you water." Still he said nothing. But something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of understanding, or maybe disbelief. She offered him a blanket. He didn't reach for it, only stared, as if memorizing her face. "Rest," she said quietly. "They'll come back looking. But not now." The sun rose slowly behind the trees, and Clara, despite the danger, felt no fear with him in her barn. But the next morning shattered that stillness. Before dawn had fully broken, the dog began to bark. Then came the thudding hooves. Not from one horse. Not from 5. Dozens. She stepped onto the porch, heart pounding. The Comanche were here. Every shadow between the cottonwoods held a mounted warrior. Faces painted, bows drawn, eyes hard. They made no sound, only watched her with an unnatural stillness that made her skin crawl. Then the man she'd saved stepped from a barn. He was standing, though barely, the blanket still over his shoulders, blood still drying on his side. But his voice was strong as he called out something in Comanche. It was a command. The warriors did not attack. Instead, they dismounted as one, weapons lowered slightly, still wary. One of the older men came forward and spoke sharply to the wounded man, angry, questioning. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Clara stood motionless, her palms open by her sides, waiting. Then the wounded man turned to her. "My name is Tahu," he said, voice gravelly with pain. "You saved me." Clara blinked, caught off guard by his English. "I did what was right," she said. Tahu nodded, then spoke quickly to his people. There was tension in their ranks, mistrust, but his words held weight. After a few moments, the older warrior turned to her and said in broken English, "You helped warrior of ours. You not harmed him. This we remember." Then they left, just like that. Clara stood there long after they disappeared into the tree line, the dust of their departure hanging in the air. She didn't understand what had just happened, only that the act she feared would get her killed had earned her something strange. Respect. That night, she expected them to return, but the woods stayed silent. The next day, she found a bundle at her door, fresh meat wrapped in hide, herbs for medicine, a carved bone pendant, a silent thanks, and the beginning of something deeper. For the next 2 weeks, she didn't see Tahu again, but she thought of him constantly, wondered if he had healed, if he'd told anyone about her. Then on a rain-heavy evening, she spotted him again, just inside the tree line, watching her from a distance. Clara stepped onto the porch, letting the soft drizzle soak her dress. She didn't speak. Neither did he, but she didn't look away. He came again the next week, closer this time. They shared a few words. He asked about the herbs she'd used, the stitches, the water. His voice was steady, deep, touched with curiosity. And Clara found herself smiling more in those few minutes than she had in months. There was something in him, something quiet and noble, forged by fire and solitude, like he knew the weight of grief, just as she did. Over the next month, his visits became routine, always brief, always at dusk. He brought pelts. She gave bread. He taught her words in Comanche. She showed him how to treat wounds with willow bark. They didn't call it friendship, but it was. Then one night, he came late, his face shadowed, eyes grim. "They come again," he said. "The ones who chased me. They found tracks. They think you helped." Clara's blood ran cold. "They'll come for you," Tahu said. "They want blood. Yours. Or mine." She swallowed hard. "What do we do?" He looked at her then, really looked. "I will not let them take you." And she believed him. That night, she packed what little she could. Tahu brought a spare horse. She rode behind him into the dark woods, away from the town she'd known, away from the life that had caged her in grief and silence. Days passed, then weeks. She lived with his people on the edge of the mountains, distant from the townsfolk, but close to something deeper. The tribe was wary of her at first, but word had spread. She was a woman who saved a dying warrior when no one else would. Slowly, they welcomed her. She learned their ways, their tongue. She cooked over their fires and laughed with their children. She stitched hides and bathed in cold streams and listened to stories that ran deep in the roots of the trees. And Tahu never left her side. He showed her how to track elk. She showed him how to plant winter vegetables. They shared silence more often than words. But in that silence, something bloomed. One night, as frost gathered on the edge of autumn, she sat beside him outside his lodge. The stars blinked above them like cold silver sparks. "I used to dream of running," she whispered. "When my husband died, I thought I'd never breathe freely again." Tahu looked at her. "You do now." She nodded slowly. "With you, I feel free." He reached out, took her hand. Calloused, warm, steady. "You saved my life," he said. "Not just with your hands, with your spirit." She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. The wind rustled the trees like a lullaby. Clara Sutton had once been a widow on the edge of nowhere. Now, she was something else entirely. A healer, a companion, a woman reborn in the shadow of the wild. And the man she had saved, he had become her home. They had both been wounded. Now, together, they had healed. The snows came early that year. Clara stood at the edge of the winter camp, her breath visible in the pale morning air, watching smoke curl from the lodges into the sky. Tahu was beside her, quietly tying a bundle of firewood with sinew. His presence, steady as always, was a comfort in the cold. 3 seasons had passed since the night she'd ridden into the dark behind him, leaving behind the world that once defined her, the town, her little farm, the quiet grief of widowhood. They felt like echoes now, faint and far away. Out here, among the Comanche, she had found something she never expected, belonging. But peace on the frontier was always fragile. That afternoon, the riders came. 3 of them, strangers to the tribe. They came slow, not with raised weapons, but with faces drawn in uncertainty. One wore a U.S. Army coat, the kind that sent unease through any Comanche camp. The others had settler gear, hats low, hands twitching too close to their holsters. Clara stood behind Tahu as the chief spoke with them in guarded tones. The wind whispered to the lodge skins, tension like a wire strung between all of them. Then she heard her name. "Sutton," one of the white men said, frowning. "Clara Sutton?" She stepped forward slowly. Her heart thudded against her ribs. The man blinked. "Well, we thought you were dead." Clara didn't answer. She looked at the soldier. He didn't meet her gaze. "We tracked you as far as Wichita Falls," the settler said. "Then we lost the trail. No one knew if you'd been taken or if you'd run." "I wasn't taken," she said calmly. I chose to leave. The man glanced toward the Comanche warriors gathering nearby. You chose this? She nodded without hesitation. Yes. They tried to convince her to return. They said the town had changed, that new folks had come, that the past could be left behind, that she didn't belong out here with them. Tahu stood at her side, silent as stone, but Clara felt his hand brush hers, grounding her. I belong where I'm trusted, she said firmly, and loved. The man looked at Tahu, then back at her. They're planning to push west again. The army. There'll be more raids, more soldiers. I know. You'll be in danger. I've been in danger my whole life, she replied. Only now I'm not alone. With that, the men left, but the shadow of war had returned with them. That night, around the fire, the elders discussed moving the camp deeper into the canyons, away from the trails, away from soldiers. Tahu sat beside her, watching the flames, his expression unreadable. You think they'll come soon? She asked. He nodded once. Maybe before spring. She reached for his hand. If they do, we stay together, no matter what. He turned to her. Even if it means fighting? Clara hesitated. Even then. And so, the days passed under the weight of what might come. Winter deepened. The forest grew quiet. They hunted less and watched more. Every rider on the ridge was a warning. Every broken branch in the snow a question. But in the silence, love still bloomed. In the early mornings, Clara would wake to the sound of Tahu's breathing beside her, his arm draped across her hip, their furs tangled. He had a way of listening when she spoke, really listening, not just to her words, but to the space between them. When she mentioned her late husband, Tahu never asked more than she offered. He didn't try to fill the silence. He just held it with her, and she did the same for him. Tahu had lost brothers, a sister. His father had died in a cavalry ambush when Tahu was still a boy. He never said it outright, but the pain lived behind his eyes, stitched into the lines of his mouth. With Clara, he didn't need to pretend he was invincible. One evening, as snow drifted past the firelight, she turned to him and whispered, If we had met back in that little town, before all this, do you think we still would have known each other like this? Tahu looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. You were meant to find me broken, so I could see what it means to be whole again. Clara leaned in and kissed him, soft, slow, filled with the ache of everything they'd survived. That winter, they built a life beneath snow-covered trees, a life made of shared meals, of laughter with the children, of quiet nights and the soft murmur of dreams, until the soldiers came. It was March. The snow was thinning, the earth just beginning to thaw. Clara was fetching water when the sound of gunshots split the sky. The camp erupted, women calling out, children scattering, warriors shouting commands. She dropped the pail and ran. Tahu was already on horseback, bow in hand, shouting to the others in Comanche. Clara grabbed what she could, medicine, blankets, her knife, and fled with the women toward the high ridge trail. Smoke curled from the lower lodges. The soldiers had brought fire. By nightfall, the tribe had scattered into the hills. Some were missing, some wounded. Tahu returned to her covered in ash and blood, none of it his. They'll come again, he said. We must leave this land. They traveled for days. South, toward the desert mesas where the wind carved stone into cathedrals. It was rough land, dry and unyielding, but they found an abandoned cave system once used by nomadic tribes. It became their refuge. There, under the red cliffs, Clara and Tahu married in the old way. There was no priest, no paper, just hands joined under the stars. Vows spoken with eyes and touch in silence. I was a widow, Clara whispered, her forehead against his. I thought that was the end of my story. Tahu brushed her cheek. No, that was only the beginning. Seasons passed again. The army gave up chasing them eventually. The war shifted elsewhere to other tribes, other battles. The Comanche learned to survive by moving often, trusting little, loving fiercely. Clara became their healer. The children call her Wapin, the white dove. She stitched wounds and mended hearts. The women leaned on her wisdom. The men respected her courage. And Tahu, he was her shadow and her light, still and solid. Her home, even in the wilderness. One summer morning, as they walked by the river, Clara placed his hand on her belly and whispered, "I think there's a heartbeat." Tahu's eyes widened, not with fear, but wonder. 9 moons later, a daughter was born under the autumn stars. They named her Sanaya, meaning gift from wind. And when Clara held her in trembling arms, tears streaking her cheeks, she knew that the girl was not just a child. She was the proof that something beautiful could grow from ruin. She had once been a settler's wife, living on a lonely farm with ghosts in the walls. Now, she was the wife of a warrior, a mother, a woman who had risked everything for love, and found it waiting for her in the firelight. Not loud, not easy, but true, and that Clara knew was the greatest story she would ever tell.